One question that often comes up during Lent is the rationale for the church's discipline of allowing us to eat fish on penitential days, but prohibiting us from eating meat when obviously fish still has meat on it. Like when you eat a fish, you're eating the meat of the fish. So if you can't eat meat on certain animals, why can you eat the meat of the fish? What makes this any different? I think what happens is we get confused about this if we think about it too scientifically. We know that scientifically most meat is going to be muscle tissue. So if you're eating a leg of chicken, that's chicken muscle tissue, and if you're eating a fillet of salmon, that is salmon muscle tissue. So we kind of get confused if we're thinking about it scientifically because they are both clearly the muscle tissue of the animal, and so why is one allowed and one is prohibited? Our current method of scientific categorization of biological life is relatively recent. It only dates back to the late 18th century with the system developed by the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus. Now, of course, people have been categorizing animals way before the late 18th century, and the church's discipline of fasting during Lent is very, very ancient. It goes back to apostolic times. And so, to get to the heart of this question, we have to get behind our modern scientific way of categorizing animals and look at how animal life was categorized before the advent of modern science. If, for example, we go back to the Old Testament and look at how the law of Moses categorized animals, we will see distinctions made on things like whether the animal has a cloven foot or not, or whether the animal chews cud or not, whether the animal is a hunter or a scavenger. The ancient Romans had their ways of categorizing animals as well, and even though they didn't understand the exact science of how animal biology worked, they did know the basic difference between warm-blooded animals and cold-blooded animals. The ancients discerned substantial differences between mammals and cold-blooded animals like, say, fish, especially relating to the blood. Fish were not considered a bloody animal the way mammals were. Now, of course, fish do have blood, but because the metabolism of fish is so much less than that of mammals, there are substantial differences. They have much less volume of cells in the blood. It's a measurement called hematocrit. And in most fish, it's going to be 30% less than a mammal. And in some fish, like tuna, it can approach almost 50% less. And what this means is that a fish, to the naked eye, it seems less bloody than a mammal. And so the ancients made this distinction. They obviously knew that fish have meat and mammals have meat, but the meat of mammals or other warm-blooded animals was called flesh meat, and that means like bloody meat. Whereas the meaty portions of a fish were not considered flesh meat. So when we get to the church's discipline of fasting, it was specifically flesh meat that Christians were to abstain from, not the meat of fish, which was not bloody meat, not flesh meat. So the rule of thumb is that during Lent, we abstain from the flesh of warm-blooded animals or flesh meat, which means that we are allowed to consume the flesh of fish. Now, there's another reason for this that is maybe a bit more social. The flesh of warm-blooded animals like your poultry, your pork, your beef, this was more rare in olden times. It was more difficult to get flesh meat, and so it was often associated with feasting or celebration. We see this in the New Testament, right? In the parable of the prodigal son, right? When the prodigal son returns home to the father's house, what does the father say? Kill the fatted calf. That is, we're going to celebrate. We're going to have some flesh meat because my son is home. So because flesh meat was associated with feasting or festive occasions, it was considered not appropriate for the penitential spirit of Lent. And then in some places and times during church history, you'll see that even things associated with those animals were also prohibited, like eggs at certain times were not allowed to be consumed during Lent either because of their association with flesh meat animals. So I think the church's discipline makes a lot more sense once you get back to that ancient distinction between warm-blooded and cold-blooded, or bloody meat and not bloody meat, flesh meat versus fish meat. And then it starts to make a lot more sense. And so, because the church is much more ancient than modern scientific biological categories that date from the Enlightenment, we still follow the ancient categorization when it comes to our fasting. It's not supposed to be a statement of science. Obviously, we all know that fish have meat on them, but it reflects the very ancient origin of this discipline. So I hope that helped explain it to you. If you like this video, please share it and subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next video.